Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So, last week, Joe Biden, Munich Security Conference, basically makes the point that we're back, baby! Basically talking about America on the world stage. But what does that mean for China? I mean, yes, that may mean closer cooperation with Europe and everything else, but what does that mean for the issue of China? As you remember, the relationship between the United States and China under Donald Trump was extremely toxic, and that's to put it mildly, with sanctions being one of the languages that was basically used to speak between these two superpowers. Interestingly enough, despite the fact that Donald Trump got impeached twice, Joe Biden is hitting a certain degree of pressure and resistance in changing tact or policy with China, despite the fact that he wants, supposedly, to take a larger perspective and contextual view in regards to security and economic concerns. The Department of Defense released the following: China seeking to overturn the current rules-based structure which has benefited all nations in the Indo-Pacific region. The United States and its allies seek to continue free and open environment in the region. China is using all elements of national power to bend the nations to its will. The United States is conducting freedom of navigation operations to ensure that all nations can use international waterways and air routes. The U.S. is working with allies to improve policing of national borders and exclusive economic zones to ensure sovereignty, countering China's efforts is the focus of the task force. I pointed out once before that China has like one base in Africa, and the U.S. has basically 400 near China. To have this conversation about the task force that these guys are basically coming up with, we're joined by Bradley Blankenship. He's a Prague-based American journalist, political analyst, and freelance reporter whose column can be found on RT and CGTN.com. Bradley, welcome to the show.
Hey, guys.
Freedom of navigation exercises. Like I mentioned before, that American perspective, man, I love it. And it's so overt. It's so there. If you were just sitting on the moon and you were looking at these events, you would come away with somewhat of a different assessment and potentially even a different name for the freedom of navigation exercises. These are often provocative, to put it mildly, especially from the perspective of China. And it seems that we don't allow for other countries to have other points of view that are or diverges from our own. And that seems to put us perpetually at the brink of war or a conflict with other nations, especially China. What do you think about this new task force, especially when I keep making the point that China has like one base in Africa? Yes, they're doing the islands, but basically all for their shores, one base, and we're surrounding them by like 400. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things to consider about what Joe Biden's really doing here. So I think the first one is Joe Biden's personal beliefs, his personal understanding of politics. And that was kind of revealed at a recent town hall event that he did. And he gave somebody asked him about China, and he, kind of foot and mouth did his signature gaffe. But, I wouldn't really call this a gaffe. And he mentioned that, there are certain political realities that Chinese leaders and American leaders face. And a lot of the right-wing critics said that he was trivializing, so-called human rights abuses or whatever. But what he was really pointing out was the fact that in China, in order for a leader in China to be respected, to have a mandate, to be supported by the public, national unity is extremely important to China. And that means making sure that China's territorial integrity is maintained, because during the century of humiliation, when China was carved up by colonial powers and exploited by countries, including the United States, was when the Chinese people were disunited, parts of China were taken off from the mainland. And, Xi Jinping, the current president of China, could never let that happen. That would be off the table. And from his perspective, what the U.S. is doing and running interference in Hong Kong and Xinjiang, Taiwan, this is exactly that. It's a threat to China's national integrity. And Biden made the case basically saying that. At the same time, there's a political reality that American leaders face, which is the idea that America is the bastion of freedom and democracy in the world, and any American president that doesn't believe in that cause, which we've been fed to believe since at least the end of the Second World War, Any American president that doesn't believe in that or won't uphold that cause will inevitably be seen as un-American. And that would make Biden a one-term president. He basically said this. I mean, a lot of people got upset and they don't like seeing how the sausage is made, but that's it. And I think there's a foreign policy establishment that Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump really tapped into, these China hardliners, right? And they want to keep Biden accountable for that and say, if he backs off from the position of falsely calling what's happening in Xinjiang a genocide, that would be him being un-American. Or if he's going to adhere to the one China principle, the one China policy, that the United States agreed to in the 1970s when they normalized relations with China, that would somehow be un-American.
But that's kind of my point. It provokes us. It keeps us at a precipice. It completely ignores that other countries have their own realities. And that's problematic. Like, I got to be honest, I don't even know how that becomes a prevailing point of view in regards to politics, because you can never get anything done under those guidelines. Like, so where does Joe Biden go with this? I mean, it sounds like you're saying that, and I guess I can agree with this. The political realities that these countries have to deal with, and the people in these countries, especially politicians, or for that matter, Joe Biden, is to deal with a certain degree of strongmanness, being strong, regardless of what they want to accomplish behind the scenes. Being strong in this issue of force, this issue of we can punch you in the eye, that type of stuff becomes the prevailing conversation, despite the fact that what's going on beneath it may be different. That's what it sounds like you're saying.
Well, I think there is also, with this military assessment, there is, to be fair, some truth to be had here. The U.S. wants to see how it will be able to potentially fight the People's Liberation Army when China seeks to reclaim Taiwan. I think China has made it very clear that through whatever means necessary, up and including to military action, they will take control of Taiwan once again. Now, on this issue, we have to understand here that, China, for their case, is acting within the confines of international law. Taiwan is considered a part of China under international law. The one China policy is rooted in the fact that the United Nations has recognized the People's Republic of China as the only legitimate government of the territory of China, which includes Taiwan. The United States in 1978 agreed to this commitment, this diplomatic commitment. They accepted the one China principle. And when the People's Republic of China was affirmed to the United Nations by the Assembly in 1971, they became the legal and lawful government of the country, right? So them taking control of Taiwan, real control, de facto control, not just de jure, but de facto control, it would be rooted in the idea, the simple idea of self-defense, right? But of course, the United States says they believe in the one China principle, yet at the same time they're peddling weapons to the separatist forces on the island. So
America's foreign policy, through various American presidencies, whether we're talking about Nixon or Carter or Reagan or more recent ones, it's been confusing. We've gone back and forth in our relationship with China, and like you're saying, a while back we cut a lot of our ties with Taiwan when we were trying to open China up. That succeeded in large part. That, of course, led to a large degree of China's growth with Deng Xiaoping heading to other countries, seeing how they were doing things, and then bringing that modernization back home. And they've been riding that wave ever since then. But there's also a larger, if you look at this a little bit more abstractly, you have one major power historically in the 20th century, the United States. You have a couple of other rising powers. First, the Soviet Union, of course, rivaling the U.S., then that falls, declines. You have the Russian Federation. Now you have Russia, China, the U.S., and the EU as these global centers. And I'm leaving out some. I'm leaving out India. I'm leaving out Brazil, et cetera. But I guess where I'm going with this is there's this idea of the Thucydides trap. We've talked about this before on the show, where if you have a dominant power and that power is maintaining its current level of power, and other countries or other nations are rising, they're gaining power, you're setting yourself up for an almost inevitable, it's the rule, not the exception, is how it's been put, almost inevitable confrontation between these two powers. From that perspective, looking at this in terms of realpolitik, isn't it perfectly sensible for the United States, we're sort of playing a devil's advocate here, for the United States to prepare for war, to prepare at least on a war footing with the idea that confrontation is inevitable? What's your take on that, Brad?
I don't think that this confrontation is necessarily, I mean, of course, there's going to be pushback from the United States as it tries to maintain its dominance. And I think it's, at the same time, it's very clear that, you know, the United States, being a predominant capitalist country that it is pretty much, as we've seen, you know, the entire history of the country, it's just really seeking what the elite wants. And if you actually look at what's going on with elite investors and capital flows from the United States to China, it's very clear that actually the business elite I would say at least a significant portion of the financial elite and the investing class in the United States will resist this war, actually, because it would destabilize markets, and because of the fact that China is so intertwined with the American economy. The fact that, you know, I was just reading today, actually, that the Chinese yuan, the internationalized Chinese yuan, is actually becoming one of the top traded foreign currencies in the world now. And, you know, it's actually competing with the Japanese yen and the British pound sterling. So it's actually a really interesting dynamic here. And what I think is so different is that in the past, the world has been so disconnected where it was possible to decouple, but it's just not now. It's not possible to do that without actually really upsetting the elite in the United States. And they always,
well, and the pandemic showed that. In part, the pandemic forced us to see what a major gap in international trade would look like. And this hit home most, I think, with PPE back in March, April of last year, when we were really struggling in the United States, European countries also struggling to get protective equipment, because most of the manufacturing centers of those products are, of course, based in Southeast Asia and East Asia. And so, you know, they were dealing with the pandemic too. They were producing their supplies and they were using them. They weren't exporting them. But I want to come back to this. War is certainly destructive, and in that sense, it reduces total GDP. But war is also immensely profitable. And United States has a military-industrial complex like no other nation. From that perspective, there's also this argument that the United States has presided over an international order with the World Trade Organization, the UN, these various bodies that it predominantly set up following World War II. It seems like there's a shift. Maybe the vestiges of those institutions will carry over into whatever's coming on the other side of the United States dominated world order. But it seems like there's something that the U.S. wants to maintain there. I mean, you're saying that it would destabilize things, but the U.S. is also trying to maintain its own kind of stability here.
This also kind of speaks to the fact that the United States is so divided that it's not even just the fact that people in the street are divided between race and class and so on, but actually the ruling class in the United States, which I think was evident going way back, but I think was really clear in the election of Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton, that the ruling class itself is divided over the direction of the country to manage America's decline as an imperial power. And you point out there could be a possible conflict between the military-industrial complex and the financial institutions. I think that speaks again to the weakness of the United States in this situation, and the fact that, you know, the elite class for so long has been lockstep, but now there's significant divides.
Bradley, we need to close out, but just a quick question on Taiwan. At which point does self-determination apply? Meaning, at which point is Taiwan, even though it's considered, you know, a one China principle and everything else, is there an argument to be made that Taiwan has a certain degree of self-determination in and of itself after being apart for a period of time, as opposed to being under this idea of the one China principle and, like you said, China militarily being able to take the country? What do you say about that? We only have like 30 seconds, to be honest. We're pushed it over, but I'm just curious.
I think just briefly, I think, you know, that typically that usually happens when there's significant international recognition and some kind of root in international law. And so far, in regards to Taiwan, that has not happened.
Fair enough. The voice that you guys are listening to is Bradley Blankenship. It's Prague-based American journalist, political analyst, and freelance reporter, whose column can be found on RT and CGTN.com. You can follow Bradley on Twitter at BradBlank_, and find his writings on RT.com and CGTN.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment talking about the deep freeze in Texas.